The sun bore down like punishment, a relentless force hammering the cracked earth of the New Mexico territory. In the suffocating silence of the high desert canyon, the only sound was the soft clop of hooves on stone and the occasional wheeze of a horse's breath. Eli Barrett leaned forward in the saddle, narrowing his eyes beneath the brim of a sun-stained hat. The land stretched out before him like a wound, raw, blistered, and unyielding. The summer of 1875 had been the worst he'd seen since coming west. No rain for months, just dust, heat, and the kind of quiet that made a man's skin crawl. He tugged gently on the reins. "Easy, Jasper," he muttered to the black gelding beneath him. The horse snorted and obeyed, ears twitching. Eli wasn't supposed to be out this far. His ranch, modest and struggling, needed fence repair and water rerouting. But when Sheriff Clay Morgan asked him to ride out and look into rumors of traffickers operating near Dead Man's Gulch, he didn't hesitate. Eli knew these canyons better than any man in Silver Creek. More importantly, he couldn't ignore cries for help. Not anymore. Not since Samuel. A jagged rockslide had partially blocked the trail ahead. Eli dismounted, tying Jasper to a stunted juniper tree. The dry wind whistled through the canyon like a warning. He stepped forward, boots crunching against gravel, Winchester rifle slung over his shoulder. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he might have mistaken it for wind. But no, there it was again. A voice, weak, dry, barely human. "Por favor. Agua." He froze. Female, Spanish, pain in every syllable. He moved quickly now, ducking around the bend in the canyon wall, eyes scanning for movement. What he found stopped him cold. There, nestled in the shadow of a boulder, was a makeshift wooden cage, barely big enough for a person to crouch in. Inside, slumped and filthy, was a young woman. She looked like she hadn't seen water or sleep in days. Her long, dark hair clung to her face in tangled clumps. Her wrists were rubbed raw and bloody where ropes had bound them, though someone had since cut them loose, probably to make her easier to display or trade. Her dress was torn and dust-covered, clinging to her gaunt frame. When her eyes lifted to meet his, Eli saw not panic, but calculation. She was terrified, yes, but not broken, not yet. He dropped to one knee beside the cage. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, switching to the best Spanish he could muster. "I'm going to get you out." She didn't answer, just stared. Parched lips cracked open, her voice barely audible. "Agua!" He unscrewed the canteen from his belt and passed it through the bars. She drank in greedy gulps, water spilling down her chin. Eli stood and looked at the cage. Primitive. A few nailed-together planks, no real lock. A solid kick might do it, but he opted for precision. He pulled the butt of his Winchester up and struck the latch with practiced force. It snapped. Carefully, he helped her out. Her legs gave way instantly, but he caught her before she hit the ground. "My name's Eli Barrett," he said. "Can you tell me yours?" She nodded slowly. "Sophia Reyes. Do you know who did this to you?" Her gaze darkened. "4 men. They killed my uncle and cousins, said they were going to sell me in Mexico." Eli clenched his jaw. It was happening more often now. Gangs picking off travelers along lesser-known routes, especially Mexicans who wouldn't be missed. Lawless scum feeding off the weak. "When are they coming back?" She hesitated. "They said nightfall." He looked up at the sun. Late afternoon already. 3, maybe 4 hours of light left. He scanned the scene. There were 3 bodies nearby, twisted awkwardly in the dust. The heat had begun its merciless work. Flies buzzed thick over the still forms. Eli approached one, knelt, and checked for signs of life. None. He didn't need long to confirm what Sophia had said. "We have to move," he said. She nodded. "You able to ride?" "I can try." They mounted together on Jasper, Sophia clinging to his waist as he urged the horse westward, toward his ranch. As they rode, Eli's thoughts swirled like storm clouds. He wasn't just bringing home a stranger, he was inviting danger. If those men found his place, well, he'd have to be ready. But there was something in the girl's grip, tight, desperate, alive, that made him certain he'd made the right choice. He'd lost too much already to look away now. They rode in silence, save for the wind and the steady beat of hooves. The landscape passed in slow, golden waves. Crows circled overhead. And still, Eli's mind churned. This wasn't just about saving a girl from slavers. This felt like fate knocking at his door. The cabin stood like a lone sentinel against the sweep of desert twilight, its silhouette etched in amber and rose as the last light drained from the sky. Eli Barrett swung down from Jasper, his legs stiff from the long ride. Sophia Reyes leaned into him, her weight feather-light, her body trembling not from cold, but exhaustion. He caught her before she could fall. "You're safe now," he murmured, though the words felt too small. Sophia said nothing, her eyes darting toward the horizon as though expecting those men to burst through the sagebrush at any moment. Eli didn't blame her. He'd felt the same way during the war. Safe never meant safe for long. He led her up the porch steps, unlocking the front door with a practiced flick of his wrist. The cabin was humble. One large room with a small hearth, a bed pushed to the back wall, and shelves lined with dry goods, tools, and a Bible that hadn't been touched in months. The air was dry and smelled of pine wood and the lingering ghost of tobacco. He set her gently on the edge of the bed. She sat like someone unsure whether they'd be allowed to stay. "I'll light the lamp," he said, striking a match and turning the wick up until a soft golden glow filled the room. "And warm the place up." She watched him move with quiet alertness, eyes tracking every step. There was no fear in her expression anymore, just wariness, like a creature trying to gauge whether a new cage was kinder than the last. Eli stoked the embers in the hearth with kindling and a dry log. Flames caught and began to spread, chasing shadows into corners. He turned to her. "I can make us something. Not fancy, but it'll hold you over." Sophia nodded. He moved about the cabin efficiently, jerky in a pan with water and beans, coffee grounds into a small kettle, all movements he'd done 1,000 times, but now felt different with another soul under his roof. Occasionally he glanced at her. She was staring at the wall where a small photo hung, an older man and woman in Sunday clothes, and beside them a young soldier in Union blue. "Your family?" she asked, her voice raspy. "My parents. Long gone." He paused, not looking at the picture. "And my brother, Samuel. He died at Gettysburg." She crossed herself, her fingers slow and reverent. "I'm sorry." Eli nodded. No words for that wound. There never were. He handed her a tin plate and cup. She ate in silence, chewing slowly, savoring each bite like a starving woman at a feast. She probably was. After they finished, he cleared the dishes and poured water from the basin into a tin cup, offering it for her to wash. She accepted it without a word, scrubbing her hands with care, her fingertips lingering over the raw welts on her wrists. "I have some salve," Eli said, rising. "For those?" She hesitated, then nodded. He fetched a small tin from the shelf and passed it to her. She opened it, sniffed the contents, and gently applied it to her wrists. When she was done, she looked up. "Thank you. For everything." Eli didn't know what to say, so he just gave a small nod and reached into the old trunk at the foot of the bed, pulling out a folded wool blanket. "You take the bed. I'll sleep near the fire." "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I can sleep on the floor." He raised a hand to stop her. "You need real rest. That cage did enough damage. I won't have you hurting more because of pride." She opened her mouth to protest again, but closed it just as fast. He could see the fatigue dragging at her shoulders. She wasn't just tired, she was on the verge of collapse. Eli spread the blanket near the hearth and laid down with his back to the flames. Outside, the desert wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the walls. Coyotes howled in the distance, their mournful calls cutting through the night like a blade. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Then he heard her voice, soft and trembling. "Why did you help me?" Eli didn't turn. He stared at the ceiling, watching the flickering shadows dance across the old wood. "Because it was right," he said. "No one else would have. That's usually how it is." "But you didn't know me. Didn't need to." She went quiet for a long moment, then, "Most people wouldn't risk their lives for someone they just met." "I'm not most people." It came out sharper than intended, so he added more gently, "I've seen too much of what happens when good men do nothing. Decided a long time ago I wouldn't be one of them." The room fell into silence again, thick and complicated. Eventually, he drifted off. He dreamed of his brother again, Samuel calling out from smoke and cannon fire, face bloodied, eyes wide with disbelief as he fell. Eli tried to reach him, but his legs wouldn't move. He awoke with a start, sweat on his brow, breath catching in his throat. The fire had died down to glowing embers. Sophia's breathing was slow and steady. She lay curled beneath the blanket, face turned toward the window. Moonlight bathed the cabin in silver. He watched her for a long time. There was something about her presence that filled the silence differently than anything else had in years. Not louder, not chaotic, but alive, real. Eli knew one thing for certain. Those men would come back. If not tonight, then tomorrow. And he'd have to decide. Was she a guest passing through, or someone worth standing and fighting for? The questions followed him into sleep, where dreams mixed with memory and firelight. Morning would bring answers, but first it would bring danger. Dawn arrived in shades of burnt orange and quiet unease. The desert stirred slowly, shaking off the cold of night with long, creeping rays of heat. Eli Barrett stood on the porch with a cup of coffee cradled between his hands, eyes scanning the horizon. The early light played tricks, turning rocks into movement and shadows into threats. He'd learned long ago that safety was an illusion in these parts, especially now. Behind him, Sophia stirred. She'd slept heavily, barely moving through the night, but Eli hadn't. His body had dozed, sure, but his mind hadn't left the canyon. Every creak in the walls, every whisper of wind against the eaves, felt like a warning. When Sophia finally joined him, her dark hair pulled back into a loose braid and her frame draped in one of his mother's old shawls, he didn't look at her right away. He simply handed her the second tin cup. "Strong," he said. "Hope you don't mind." She took it gratefully and sipped. Her wince said she wasn't used to the bitterness, but she didn't complain. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the land wake up. "I dreamed about them," she said quietly. "My uncle and cousins. They were smiling. We were at a picnic." Eli nodded, not offering false comfort. He knew how grief could play tricks, sweetening what had been, only to cut deeper when reality returned. "You remember anything else about the men?" he asked. Sophia's grip tightened on the cup. "One had a scar, long, down the left side of his face. Another had a gold tooth. They spoke Spanish and English, laughed when they talked about selling me." Eli's jaw tensed. "Scar, gold tooth. That helps." "They'll come back," she added, voice low. "They said they would, before sundown." "I know." He turned back into the cabin, setting his cup down. Then he moved to the window, cleaned glass framed by frayed lace curtains. From there, he had a view of the eastern trail. He paused. 3 riders. Distant but approaching, dust trailing behind them like a warning flag. "They're here." Sophia froze. Her breath caught like a snapped thread. She moved to the window and peeked through the side. "That's them," she whispered. "That's them." Eli grabbed his rifle from the wall. "Get to the cellar," he said, voice suddenly sharp with urgency. "Now!" Sophia didn't argue. He crossed the kitchen, flipped up the trapdoor, and she descended quickly, her bare feet barely making a sound on the wooden steps. He closed the door and kicked a rug back over it. When he turned to the door, the first rider was already within shouting distance. He stepped out onto the porch just as the men pulled up their horses. The one in front had a jagged scar slicing through his cheekbone. His smile was wide, but dead in the eyes. "Buenos dias, señor," the man called. "Fine morning, no?" Eli rested the butt of the Winchester on the porch rail. Not threatening, but not hidden either. "Fine enough. We are looking for someone, a girl. She ran off yesterday. Young, dark hair, about this tall." He held up a hand. "You seen anyone like that come through?" Eli shook his head. "Been out working cattle on the North Ridge. Just got back this morning." Scarface narrowed his eyes. "Strange. We tracked her this way. Saw hoof prints. 2 riders." Eli shrugged. "Plenty of travelers through these parts. Could have been anyone." The second man, a heavy-set brute with a gold tooth that glinted in the sun, spit into the dirt. The third didn't speak, just watched. A boy, really. Couldn't have been more than 19. Nervous, hands twitching near his belt. Scarface leaned forward in the saddle. "If you do see her, senor, she belongs to us. She is property. We offer payment for her return." Eli's mouth twitched, just slightly. "Didn't know people could be bought and sold again." "In these parts," Scarface said with a grin, "everything has a price." "I'll keep that in mind," Eli said flatly. There was a long silence, the kind that thickened in the chest, made men reach for their guns without even realizing it. Then, finally, Scarface nodded. "We'll check Silver Creek. Perhaps she made it there." "I'd suggest that." They turned slowly, clearly not convinced. Eli watched them disappear over the ridge. Not once did he lower his rifle. When they were gone, he waited a full 5 minutes before opening the cellar door. Sophia emerged slowly, blinking against the light. "They didn't believe you," she said. "No, but they're gone. For now." "They'll come back." Eli nodded. "Probably tonight." He closed the trap door and moved fast, checking ammunition, packing a saddlebag with jerky, water, matches, cartridges. "We can't outrun them," Sophia said suddenly. "They'll have others. Friends." "There are trails we don't even know exist." He stopped, looked at her, saw not just fear, but a kind of exhausted logic. She'd already done the calculations. "Our only chance is town," he said. "Sheriff Morgan. The law might not reach far, but in Silver Creek, it means something. They'll wait. Weeks, even. These men don't give up." Eli hesitated. Then something passed across his face. Resolve, mixed with something harder to name. "There might be another way," he said. Sophia turned toward him. "What?" He looked straight at her. "Marriage." She stared at him, blinking like he'd spoken in a foreign tongue. "What?" "If you were my wife, legally, those men couldn't claim you. You'd have my name. The law would protect you under that." Her mouth opened, then closed. "You'd marry a stranger?" she asked. "A marriage in name only," he clarified. "You'd have your space, your freedom. We do it for the papers and protection." "Nothing more." Sophia stood still, wind threading through the broken window pane. Then she asked, voice quiet, "Why would you do that for me?" Eli paused, looking away. Because I couldn't save my brother. And I couldn't save the others in that canyon. But maybe I can save you. He picked up the saddlebag, slung it over his shoulder. But it's your choice. I won't force you into anything. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then finally, with a small, resolute nod, she said, "Yes, Mr. Barrett, I accept." Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the desert, horses stirred. Inside the cabin, two strangers prepared for a journey neither of them had expected to take. A marriage that would start in fear, and perhaps end in something else entirely. They left the cabin just after sundown, riding east into the gathering darkness. Eli guided Jasper off the main trail, through a series of dry creek beds and forgotten cattle paths, choosing instinct over speed. He kept low in the saddle, eyes constantly scanning the ridges for movement. He didn't speak unless necessary. Neither did Sophia. She sat behind him, arms wrapped loosely around his waist, her fingers cold even through his shirt. She didn't complain. She hadn't complained once since he found her, and that silence unsettled him more than tears ever could. It was the kind of silence that came from knowing how cruel the world could be, and learning not to expect mercy. They didn't make camp until the moon was high and the horse was breathing hard. Eli led Jasper into a narrow rock alcove, sheltered on three sides, a place he'd used once during a cattle run and nearly forgotten. The walls kept out the wind, and the rocks held the day's heat. He tied the reins around a juniper stump, then pulled a blanket from his pack and laid it on the flattest patch of ground. Sophia dismounted slowly, her legs unsteady, but she didn't ask for help. He passed her a canteen, and she drank, her throat working in hard swallows. Eli busied himself starting a small, smokeless fire, just enough for warmth. When it caught, flickering orange light stretched up the canyon walls like trembling fingers. They sat across from each other, quiet but not uncomfortable. The silence between them had shifted. It wasn't fear anymore, it was anticipation, unspoken questions hanging in the air like dust motes. Finally, Sophia broke it. "What will happen tomorrow?" Eli didn't answer right away. He stirred the fire with a stick, watching the embers flare. "We'll reach Silver Creek by late afternoon," he said. "I know the Reverend. He won't ask many questions." She nodded slowly. "Then what?" "We talk to Sheriff Morgan. He'll need your story, what you remember. After that," he looked up at her, "you'll have protection. A name. A place to sleep where no one's going to kick in the door." Sophia's hands rested in her lap, fingers lightly interlaced. "And what happens after that? When the danger passes?" Eli's gaze lingered on the fire. "That's up to you." She tilted her head, studying him. "Is this a favor? A debt you're paying?" He looked at her then, really looked. "No, it's a choice. Maybe one we both didn't expect, but it's still ours to make." Her eyes searched his face, and for the first time since the canyon, he saw something other than fear or calculation in her expression. Curiosity, maybe even a flicker of hope. Sophia shifted closer to the fire. "If I'm going to take your name, I should know something about the man who owns it." Eli huffed a soft laugh. "I don't own much of anything. The ranch barely breaks even. The land's hard, the cattle stubborn, and the taxes never stop coming." She smiled faintly. "Still, I want to know." He took a deep breath. "Born in Pennsylvania. My folks ran a hardware store. Samuel, my brother, he was the smart one. I joined the Union Army when the war started. Thought it would be over in months." Her brow furrowed. "And Samuel?" "Joined later. Wanted to stay behind and help Ma and Pa. He didn't make it back from Gettysburg." Eli rubbed his thumb along a callus on his palm. I came west after. Couldn't stand the ghosts back home. She let the quiet settle before asking, You came looking for something? Maybe peace, maybe punishment. Haven't figured it out yet. Sophia nodded, absorbing his words like they were water in the desert. What about you? He asked. Her voice was soft. My father was a carpenter. Mama taught me English, taught me to read. I helped teach neighborhood children in Albuquerque. A pause. When they died, fever, it was just me and Uncle Mateo. He said we'd find work in Santa Fe. A seamstress shop needed hands. And those men? Eli asked carefully. They were waiting near the river crossing, claimed to be scouts, offered to guide us. That night, she stopped, her jaw tightened. They killed him, the others, and they laughed. Eli's hand curled around the rifle beside him. You don't have to say more. I know. She looked up, her eyes steady. But I will, when the sheriff asks. The fire cracked. An owl hooted from the rocks above. The night deepened around them, stars blooming overhead like wildflowers. Sophia drew her knees up and rested her chin there. You're not what I expected. Eli arched a brow. What were you expecting? A man who wanted something in return. A price for rescue. For marriage. He shook his head. I've seen what men do when they believe everything has a price. I won't be one of them. She watched him for a long moment, then said, Then maybe you're more lost than I am. Eli wasn't sure whether to laugh or agree. Maybe both. They slept in shifts. Eli dozed first, the rifle within reach, while Sophia stared into the flames. When it was her turn to rest, she lay down a little closer to him than before, still wrapped in the shawl. By morning, they both looked different, not cleaner, not less weary, but changed. Something unspoken had passed between them, a quiet understanding, the kind that comes when two people walk through fire and keep going. They packed up before sunrise, leaving no trace behind. Jasper moved slowly but steadily, winding down into lower country as they neared Silver Creek. By late afternoon, the town emerged like a mirage, dusty buildings lined along a single wide street. A steeple at the far end. The smell of horses, wood smoke, and baking bread hung in the air. Sophia's arms tightened around Eli's waist. You still sure? He asked over his shoulder. She didn't hesitate. Yes. He guided Jasper toward the church, where Reverend Jacob stood sweeping the steps. As they dismounted, Sophia's boots hit the dirt, and for the first time since the cage, she stood tall. Tomorrow, they would deal with the law, with the past. But tonight, she would become Mrs. Barrett, in name only, for now, and maybe something more. The chapel smelled of dust, old wood, and wax. Reverend Jacob stood in the doorway, mop of silver hair disheveled from wind and time, his broom frozen mid-sweep when he caught sight of Eli and the woman beside him. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered, blinking. Excuse me, Lord. Reverend, Eli said, tipping his hat. Need a moment of your time. Jacobs squinted at Sophia, who stood straight, chin lifted, though her hands clenched her shawl tightly. This about what I think it's about. Eli gave a single nod. We'd like to be married. Quietly. Lord have mercy, Jacob said again, setting his broom aside. You never even let a woman borrow your coffee pot, and now you're asking for vows. Eli said nothing, just waited. The Reverend's amusement faded quickly. He saw it then, the exhaustion in both their faces, the unspoken urgency that hung between them. All right, he said, motioning them inside. You got rings? Eli reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a plain gold band, worn smooth with age. My mother's, he said. Jacobs nodded. That'll do. They stood at the altar, flanked by two impromptu witnesses, Sheriff Clay Morgan, summoned quickly from his office, and Mrs. Mallory, the general store owner's wife, who clucked quietly to herself and smoothed Sophia's hair before the ceremony began. The service was brief, the words familiar, ancient, and strangely comforting. When Jacob spoke, his voice softened in reverence. "Do you, Eli Barrett, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Sophia Reyes, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Jacob smiled, small and solemn. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. May God bless this union and all that comes from it." Eli placed the ring gently on her finger. Sophia's hand trembled just once. When he leaned in to kiss her, he kept it brief, but her eyes locked with his afterward, deep, unreadable, and searching. Something unspoken passed between them, a shift neither had planned for. They stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, now legally married but feeling no different, and yet somehow entirely changed. Sheriff Morgan pulled Eli aside while Mrs. Mallory fussed over Sophia, offering a small white apron and an invitation to dinner. "Is she the girl from the canyon?" the sheriff asked low. Eli nodded. "Said 4 men took her uncle and cousins. She escaped before they could sell her." "Damn," Morgan muttered. "Same group we've been chasing for months. They're ghosts, in and out like smoke." "She can give a description," Eli said. "Scar, gold tooth. Spoke both languages. That'll help. I'll send riders out tonight. We'll alert every outpost within 50 miles. Eli clapped him on the shoulder. "Appreciate it." They found Sophia near the general store. She stood still as Mrs. Mallory adjusted the hem of her shawl. "You'll need curtains, dear, and flour if he expects you to bake. Do you sew?" "Some," Sophia answered. "I'll find you some good muslin. Men don't know a house from a barn without a woman's touch." Sophia smiled politely, overwhelmed but grateful. When she turned to Eli, her eyes were wide with disbelief. "These people are kind." "Mostly," Eli said. "And nosy. By sundown, half the town will know our story." She looked away, the smile fading. "It's not a story I like." "Doesn't matter," Eli said. "You're Mrs. Barrett now. Let them talk." They bought supplies quickly, dry goods, a pair of boots in Sophia's size, extra ammunition, and a brush for Jasper. The general store clerk winked at Eli and threw in a small box of peppermint candies for the new bride. By evening, they checked into the town's only hotel. Eli paid for 2 rooms, ignoring the clerk's raised brow. "Separate keys," he said firmly. The rooms were small but clean. Sophia stood in the doorway of hers, hesitating. "Thank you," she said finally. "You're welcome." He turned to leave, but she stopped him. "Why your mother's ring?" Eli paused. "It was the only one I kept. I didn't think I'd ever use it." She looked down at her hand, the band catching the light. "It fits." "Yeah," he said softly. "It does." They parted then, the door clicking gently shut between them. That night, Eli lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft creaks of an old building settling into night. Every sound made him tense, his hand close to the knife under his pillow. Years of war and loss had conditioned him never to trust quiet too much. He thought of Sophia in the next room, of her steady voice when she said, "I do," of how easily she could have chosen fear, and yet she had chosen him, not for love, but for survival. Still, something in her gaze had stirred him, something unspoken, waiting to take root. In the morning, they would return to the ranch. Sheriff Morgan would spread word. The threat might recede for a while, but it wouldn't vanish. Men, like the ones who'd caged Sophia, didn't disappear. They regrouped, waited. But now she had a name, a home, and a man willing to stand between her and the darkness. That was something. Eli closed his eyes, listening to the wind beyond the window pane. They had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. The morning they left Silver Creek, the sun was just cresting the hills, casting gold across the scrubland. Eli had woken early, saddled Jasper in silence, and tied down their supplies with the same care he gave to every task. Sophia stepped out of the hotel behind him, wearing the second-hand boots Mrs. Mallory had helped her choose. Her shawl flapped in the wind, and her expression was unreadable. They exchanged few words on the ride back. It wasn't silence born of discomfort, but one that settled naturally between people who had shared something irreversible. Married in law, yes, but in life, still strangers navigating the vast terrain between trust and familiarity. By the time the cabin appeared on the horizon, dusk was folding over the land. The outline of the roof, the weathered fencing, the distant cattle pens, all of it looked the same. But to Eli, it didn't feel the same. A presence waited inside now, a shift in what the place meant. As they rode into the clearing, Sophia touched his arm lightly. "You built all of this?" Eli nodded. "Started with nothing but a shovel and a stubborn streak." "It's beautiful," she said. She meant it. Not in the polished sense, but in the way a hard-won life carries its own quiet beauty. He dismounted and helped her down. They unpacked in the fading light, moving together without instruction. Eli showed her where the dry goods were kept, how to prime the hand pump at the basin, how to latch the front door from inside at night. "You can take the bed," he said, just as he had before. "If you'd rather, I'll sleep in the barn. Give you space." She looked around. The cabin was modest, but everything had its place. Her gaze fell on the far wall, where a doorway had been framed out with rough planks and a curtain tacked across the opening. "What's that?" "Used to be storage," he said. "I started clearing it out yesterday. Figured, maybe you'd want your own space." She walked over, lifted the curtain. Inside was a small room, barely large enough for a cot and a crate. The window faced the creek, catching the soft amber of sunset. "I can build it out more. Add shelves?" "A desk, if you want." Sophia turned toward him, something fragile and bright flickering in her eyes. "You don't have to." "I know," Eli said, "but I want to." That night, they ate quietly at the table. Sophia had insisted on preparing the beans and bread herself, referencing an old recipe book that had belonged to Eli's mother. The bread was dense and a little salty, but Eli said it was the best he'd had in months. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. As the fire crackled low, Sophia sat in the rocking chair near the hearth, hands folded in her lap. Eli leaned back against the wall, nursing the last of the coffee. "I used to dream about having a garden," she said suddenly. "Nothing fancy, just tomatoes, maybe onions. My mother always said the earth gives back what you feed it." Eli looked over at her. "There's space out back. Soil's stubborn, but it'll grow if you work it. Would you mind?" He shook his head. "Not at all." The next morning, Sophia rose before sunrise. Eli found her outside, sleeves rolled, kneeling in the dirt with a hoe and a line of seeds. Her shawl was draped over the fence. Sweat beaded on her brow, but she looked peaceful, focused. He watched her a moment before calling out, "That's cow territory, you know." She smiled, faint but sure. "Then the cows will learn to share." Over the next weeks, a rhythm settled between them. Eli worked the fields and checked the northern fence lines. Sophia tended to the house, planted her garden, and sorted through crates of old linens and tools stored away in the barn. One afternoon, Eli returned from the east pasture to find the cabin windows open, the scent of cinnamon hanging in the air. Inside, Sophia stood on a stool, hanging new curtains stitched from muslin and lace. The room felt warmer somehow, like it had taken its first real breath. Eli cleared his throat. "You've been busy." She glanced down at him. "You work outside all day?" "I figured I could do something inside." "You don't owe me that." I know, she said, but it feels good to make something mine. He nodded, understanding more than he could say. Later that evening, they sat on the porch while the sky melted into shades of rose and violet. Sophia hummed softly, a tune Eli didn't recognize. "What's that song?" he asked. "An old lullaby. My mother used to sing it when we had no candles left, and the nights felt too long." Eli closed his eyes for a moment, letting the melody linger. A week passed, then 2. Sheriff Morgan sent word that 2 of the traffickers had been caught trying to cross into Texas. The others had scattered. Some said east, others south. "They'll be watching," Morgan had warned. "But they won't come near the ranch for a while, not with the whole county looking for them." Still, Eli kept the rifle close. That night, Sophia sat by the fire, reading from one of the old books left behind by his mother. Eli watched her over the rim of his cup. She belonged there now, not just physically, but in the way people belong to a place when they've sunk roots. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "that south room, I could make it bigger, add a real window, maybe a door out to the porch." Sophia lowered the book. "Why?" "Because this arrangement," he said carefully, "shouldn't feel like another cage." Her expression shifted, softened. "It doesn't. But I want you to feel free. Even here. Especially here." She set the book aside and crossed the room, sitting beside him on the edge of the chair. "When those men had me locked away, I prayed for death," she said quietly. "I thought God had forgotten me." Eli looked down at his hands. "But then you came," she whispered. "And maybe that was his answer." He swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "You saved me, Eli, not just from them, from being forgotten." He met her gaze. "I'm no savior. You're a good man. And now, my husband." The fire crackled between them. Outside, the night stretched wide and silent, and inside, something was beginning to take root, not just safety, but something far rarer. A chance to begin again. The wind was shifting. Eli could feel it in the way the trees swayed harder at night, how the cattle grew restless around dusk. Even Jasper, steady as a stump, had started pawing at the dirt more often than usual. It wasn't the weather. It was something else, something closing in. Sophia noticed it too. Her movements had become quieter, more deliberate. She lingered at the windows a little longer before closing the shutters each night. Though she never said it aloud, Eli could tell she was waiting. For news, for footsteps on gravel, for the past to come knocking again. Then, one morning, as they finished breakfast, the knock did come, but it wasn't what either of them expected. A rider from town arrived just before noon, dust clinging to his coat. He handed over a small envelope addressed in Reverend Jacobs's careful handwriting. Eli opened it on the porch while Sophia stood behind him, shielding her eyes from the sun. He read it once, then again, slower. "It's from Jacobs," he said finally, turning to face her. "The annulment papers. He sent them, just in case." Sophia didn't move. "He says we both need to sign if we want it filed." A long pause followed. The breeze tugged at her skirt. She took the letter from him and read it herself. Her hands were steady, but her throat moved as she swallowed. "He thought we'd want the option," Eli added. "Figured this whole thing was temporary." Sophia stared down at the page. "Did you ask him to send this?" "I did," Eli admitted. "Back when we first got back to town. I didn't want you trapped." She nodded once and walked back into the cabin without a word. Eli didn't follow. Instead, he sat on the porch steps, the letter heavy in his hand. It had seemed like the right thing at the time. Give her a way out. He hadn't counted on how much things would change, how she would change him. When he finally went inside, she was standing by the table, the paper folded neatly in half. "We don't have to decide now," he said gently. Sophia looked at him, her expression unreadable. "What if I don't want an annulment?" The question hung in the air, as still as the heat before a summer storm. Eli stepped closer. "Then we won't file it." She set the paper down and crossed her arms. "But I need to ask you something first. Something honest." He nodded. "Do you want this to be real, Eli? Not because you feel responsible. Not because I was hurt or helpless, but because of what's grown here." He looked at her, really looked, at the strength in her jaw, the steadiness in her voice, the way she carried her pain with dignity and determination. "I do," he said. "I want it to be real." She exhaled, something uncoiling in her chest. "So do I." They stood there for a long moment, the silence not heavy this time, but full of possibility. Then Sophia walked over to the small hearth and tossed the envelope into the fire. The paper caught quickly, curling into ash. Later that evening, they sat side by side on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Sophia held a cup of tea, her hands wrapped around it for warmth, even though the air was still warm. "I got a letter too," she said quietly. Eli turned to her, surprised. "From who?" "Mrs. Mallory. She enclosed a clipping from the newspaper, said she heard I'd started a garden and thought I might want to do more." She reached into her skirt pocket and pulled out the folded paper. It was an advertisement for a traveling schoolteacher program, sponsored by the church, encouraging women to teach literacy in rural communities. "She thinks I could open a class here," Sophia explained, "for the neighboring ranch kids." "Maybe once a week." Eli leaned back against the railing, nodding slowly. "You'd be good at that." "I think so too." She looked out across the field. "I used to think teaching was the only thing I could offer. Now, it feels like a piece of me I get to reclaim." He watched her in the soft light, the way her profile glowed with purpose. "You want to build something here," he said. "Yes," she whispered. "With you." The next day, they rode into Silver Creek to speak with the sheriff. Sheriff Morgan greeted them with a grim expression. "We caught wind of the last two men, headed east, crossing into the territory near Fort Winfield." Eli stiffened. "You sure?" "Not entirely, but we've got eyes on the trail. It looks like they're running scared. Might not come back. Or they might circle," Eli said. "Wait until we let our guard down." Morgan looked at Sophia. "You still want to testify if we catch them?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Good," the sheriff said. "Because if we want them behind bars, we'll need your word to make it stick." They left the office and walked through town, past the church, the saloon, and the tailor's shop where Mrs. Mallory stood waving from her window. Back at the ranch, the days passed with a new kind of quiet, not the silence of uncertainty, but the hush of something settling into place. Sophia organized a corner of the cabin with books and chalk. Eli built a bench outside near the garden and widened the porch. He started calling it our place without thinking, and she didn't correct him. One evening, she stood on a crate outside the cabin, hammering up a small wooden sign carved with her initials and the word school. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Eli came out to watch, wiping his hands on a rag. "Looks official." "It is," she said with a grin. He walked over, standing beside her. "You sure about this? Staying?" She turned to him, her smile fading into something more serious. "I stay because I choose to, not because I have to. This is where I want to be." He reached out, brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "Then I'm glad I found you." "No," she said. "We found each other." The light faded. The crickets started up in the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. But inside the cabin, everything was still and warm and whole. Autumn crept in with little ceremony, just cooler mornings, crisper air, and a golden haze that settled over the hills like a memory you didn't realize you missed until it was already fading. The cottonwoods near the creek had begun to turn, their leaves fluttering like coins in the breeze. Eli Barrett stood beneath them one morning, axe in hand, splitting wood for winter. His shirt clung to his back, but he welcomed the ache in his shoulders, the clean rhythm of work. From the cabin came the sound of Sophia's voice, reading aloud from a storybook. A chorus of young voices giggled in reply. Her school had grown faster than either of them expected. 5 children from nearby ranches now gathered every Thursday, arriving on wagons and horseback with packed lunches and eager faces. Eli set another log onto the stump and brought the axe down clean. He listened to the cadence of her voice, how confident it had become, how natural it sounded, woven into the life they'd made. He hadn't signed another paper since the annulment was burned. He didn't need to. Every day she chose to stay was worth more than ink or law. That night, after the last of the students rode off and the lanterns glowed soft against the windows, Eli found Sophia in the garden, her hands dirty with late harvest. She was pulling carrots from the soil, humming quietly. He crouched beside her, reached over to toss one of the vegetables into her basket. "You know, there's easier ways to get dinner." "You keep saying that," she replied with a half-smile, "but I don't see you turning it down." He chuckled and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Town's quiet. Haven't heard a thing from Morgan in weeks." "That's good, right?" "Maybe. Or maybe they're waiting." She looked at him. "Do you think they'll come back?" Eli leaned back on his heels, glancing out across the darkening field. "They might, but I'm not the man I was when I found you, and neither are you." Sophia set the last carrot aside and brushed her hands together. "I'm not scared, Eli. Not anymore." He met her eyes. "I believe you." They walked back to the cabin together, side by side in the fading light. The porch light glowed like a beacon as they approached, and the smell of something sweet baking wafted through the open window. Inside, Eli took the kettle off the stove while Sophia set the small table for 2. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. After dinner, they sat on the porch again, just like they had those early nights. The same view, the same stars, but everything felt changed, filled in, fuller, lived in. Sophia leaned against his shoulder, her voice soft. "Do you ever think about that day, when you found me?" "All the time." "And if you hadn't come down that canyon?" "I try not to think about that." She nodded slowly. "It still feels like a dream sometimes. A strange, hard dream." Eli took her hand, thumb brushing gently over the curve of her knuckles. "It was real, all of it. And we made it out." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rustle of trees and the distant cry of an owl. Then, from the road, came the sound of hooves, slow and deliberate. Not the frantic gallop of children late for school, nor the steady rhythm of neighbors coming to call. This was different. Eli stood immediately, every muscle alert. Sophia followed, heart pounding, though her face stayed calm. From the shadows emerged a single rider. Not Scarface, not Goldtooth. A man neither of them recognized, weathered and lean, with a badge pinned to his chest. Eli relaxed slightly as the rider dismounted and tipped his hat. "Evening." "Can I help you?" Eli asked. "Name's Deputy Langford, out of Fort Winfield. Sheriff Morgan sent word weeks ago about a woman who escaped a trafficking ring. We picked up the last man 3 days ago near the border." Sophia's breath caught. Langford continued, "He talked. Gave us names, routes, the works. We've got a warrant for the ringleader, man with a scar. Word is, he's fled into Mexico, but he won't come back easy. And the others? Done, Langford said. We've shut down their trade in 3 counties. Thought you folks ought to know. Sophia stepped forward, her voice clear. Is it over? Langford looked at her, surprised by her composure. Maybe not forever, ma'am, but for now, yeah. It's over. She nodded, not smiling, just relieved. The deputy tipped his hat again, mounted his horse, and disappeared into the dusk. Eli turned to her. You all right? Sophia looked up at him. I think so. I think I can breathe again. He reached out and pulled her into a long, quiet embrace. She melted into it. The next morning, they burned the last of the firewood from the old canyon trip, the bundle of sticks he'd gathered when he thought he might need to flee again. A symbol, they agreed, of the life they weren't going back to. Seasons turned. Snow dusted the hills that winter. Then came spring, bringing wildflowers and warm winds and more children to the school. Eli built a proper addition to the cabin, a new room with wide windows and shelves filled with Sophia's books. They planted new rows in the garden, started keeping chickens. When visitors came, neighbors, riders passing through, old friends from town, they always asked the same question. How'd you two meet? And Eli would smile, settle back in his chair, and answer the same way every time. I found her when she was lost, he'd say. And she found me when I didn't even know I was searching. And Sophia would look over at him, her eyes full of the quiet certainty of a woman who had built something out of ruin, and nod. Because in the end, it wasn't about how they started. It was about what they chose to become. Together.